I vanished after my sister convinced my fiancé I was cheating using fake evidence she created over 6 months. The confrontation happened on a Thursday evening in our living room with my entire family present. My fiancé Derek stood by the fireplace holding his phone while my parents sat on the couch looking devastated. My sister Olivia perched on the armrest with tears streaming down her face, playing the role of heartbroken messenger perfectly. Derek's voice shook when he asked me to explain the text messages, the hotel receipts, the photos of me with another man. I stared at the evidence he kept shoving at me and felt my reality fracturing. Every piece looked real. The text showed intimate conversations with someone named Marcus discussing secret meetings. The receipts had my name and credit card number. The photos showed me laughing with a dark-haired man at restaurants I'd never been to. I told Derek I'd never seen any of this before, that someone had fabricated everything. He asked who would do that. I looked at Olivia and saw the smallest flash of satisfaction in her eyes before she buried her face in her hands. She'd done this. My own sister had spent months destroying my life and now sat there crying fake tears while my engagement imploded. My mother said she'd seen some of the evidence weeks ago when Olivia brought it to her in confidence. She'd hoped it wasn't true, but now seeing everything together, she didn't know what to believe. My father wouldn't even look at me. Derek said Olivia had been bringing him evidence for 6 months, piece by piece, trying to protect him from the truth. She'd begged him not to confront me because she loved us both and wanted to believe I'd stop. But the evidence kept mounting until she couldn't stay silent anymore. I asked Derek why he'd never mentioned any of this to me. He said he'd been in denial, hoping his gut feeling was wrong. But Olivia had been so careful, so detailed in documenting everything. The hotel where I'd supposedly stayed with my affair partner had confirmed my credit card was used. The phone records showed hundreds of texts to a number I'd never seen. I pulled out my actual phone and showed them my real text history, my real call logs. Derek said I probably had a second phone for the affair. The accusation felt surreal. I'd been with Derek for 4 years, engaged for 1. We'd built a life together, planned a wedding for next spring, bought a house last month that we were renovating together, and now my sister's lies were destroying everything while my family watched. Olivia spoke through her sobs, saying she'd struggled for months with whether to tell Derek. She'd discovered the affair accidentally when she borrowed my laptop and saw messages pop up. She'd felt torn between loyalty to her sister and protecting Derek from being humiliated. I asked her which laptop since I only had one, and she'd never borrowed it. She described my work laptop in perfect detail, including the scratch on the corner and the stickers I'd placed on it. I felt cold realization wash over me. She'd accessed my laptop somehow, probably when she'd stayed at our place 3 months ago while her apartment was being fumigated. Derek asked why I was deflecting instead of addressing the evidence. I told him someone had clearly stolen my identity, used my credit cards without authorization, and photoshopped images to make it look like I was somewhere I'd never been. My father said that level of identity theft would require police involvement and seemed unlikely. My mother asked gently if I'd been unhappy in the relationship and made a mistake I was now trying to cover up. The betrayal from my own parents felt worse than Derek's accusations. They were supposed to know me, to trust me. Instead, they were believing Olivia's performance. I walked over to Olivia and told her to stop lying. She looked up at me with wide, wounded eyes and asked how I could accuse her of such a horrible thing. She'd been trying to protect everyone involved, to give me a chance to come clean on my own terms. Now I was attacking her for caring too much. Derek stepped between us and told me not to take my anger out on Olivia when she'd only been trying to help. I asked him if he seriously believed I'd been conducting a 6-month affair without him noticing anything different about my behavior. He said infidelity experts say the best liars are the ones who maintain their normal routines perfectly. I realized then that Olivia had been coaching him, filling his head with justifications for believing her lies. She'd been playing both sides, probably sending him articles about cheating spouses and how to recognize deception. I asked to see the text messages more carefully, and Derek handed me his phone. The messages were detailed and intimate, discussing feelings and future plans, but they didn't sound like me. The word choices were slightly off, the emoji usage different from my patterns. I pointed this out, and Derek said I was grasping at straws. That, of course, I'd claim the messages didn't sound like me. What else could I say? The hotel receipts showed charges from 4 different properties over 6 months. I told them I could prove I'd been elsewhere on those dates. Derek said he'd already checked my calendar, and I'd marked those days as working from home or running errands. Easy to fake an alibi. I pulled up my work email and showed them meeting invitations and video call logs from 2 of those dates. My mother said I could have rescheduled or declined those meetings. I opened my credit card statements on my phone and showed them the charges from those exact dates at grocery stores and gas stations near our house. Derek said I could have given someone else my card. Every piece of evidence I presented was dismissed with an explanation for how a cheater would cover their tracks. Olivia had thought of everything. She'd created a narrative so complete that any defense I mounted just made me look more guilty. She stood up and said she needed air, that this was too painful. She hugged Derek and whispered something I couldn't hear before leaving the room. My father followed her out. My mother stayed but looked at me with disappointment and confusion. Derek said he needed time to think, that he couldn't marry someone he didn't trust. I asked him to give me 24 hours to prove my innocence. He said he'd already given me 6 months of doubt and denial. I went to our bedroom and called my best friend Rachel, who I'd known since college. She answered immediately and listened while I explained everything through tears. She said she'd noticed Olivia acting strange lately, but hadn't thought much of it. A month ago, Olivia had asked detailed questions about my daily routine and who I worked with. Rachel had assumed she was planning a surprise for me. Now it seemed she'd been gathering information to make her lies more credible. Rachel asked what I needed. I told her I was going to disappear for a while, that I couldn't stay in this house with Derek looking at me with disgust. She offered her spare room immediately. I packed a bag with essentials while Derek stayed in the living room. I left my engagement ring on the dresser with a note saying I'd never cheated and he'd regret believing Olivia. Then I walked out without looking back. My phone started buzzing before I reached my car. Text messages from my mother asking where I was going, from Olivia asking if I was okay, from Derek saying running away made me look guilty. I turned off my phone and drove to Rachel's apartment across town. She met me at the door with wine and tissues and let me cry for 2 hours before asking what my plan was. I told Rachel I needed to figure out how Olivia had created such detailed fake evidence. The text messages meant she'd either hacked my phone or created a fake number that looked like mine. The hotel receipts meant she'd accessed my credit card information. The photos meant she'd either hired someone who looked like me or used deepfake technology. None of it was simple or cheap. This had taken planning, money, and technical skill. Rachel asked why Olivia would do this. I thought about my sister's life over the past few years. She'd been engaged once, but her fiancé left her for someone else. She'd been fired from 2 jobs for conflicts with coworkers. She lived in a small apartment while Derek and I had just bought a house. At our engagement party last year, she'd gotten drunk and said something about how I always got everything easily while she had to struggle. I'd thought she was just having a bad night. Now I realized she'd been building resentment. Rachel suggested hiring a private investigator. I said I didn't have money for that since my savings were tied up in the house with Derek. She offered to loan me money. I started crying again at her immediate support when my own family had abandoned me so easily. The next morning, I called a private investigator named Tom Reeves, who Rachel had found online with good reviews. He agreed to meet me that afternoon at a coffee shop. Tom was in his 50s with gray hair and a skeptical expression. He listened to my story without interrupting and then asked detailed questions about Olivia's technical abilities, her financial situation, her relationships. I told him she worked in digital marketing and understood social media and photo editing. She'd been living beyond her means recently, buying expensive clothes and taking trips she couldn't afford on her salary. She'd dated a few men briefly, but nothing serious since her broken engagement. Tom said creating fake evidence that's sophisticated would require either technical expertise or money to hire someone who had it. He asked if I wanted him to investigate Olivia or focus on proving the evidence was fake. I said both. He explained his rates and I agreed, even though it would drain my emergency fund. He said he'd start by examining the digital fingerprints on the evidence Derek had shown me. I needed to get copies of everything, which meant contacting Derek. I texted Derek from Rachel's phone asking if we could meet to discuss the situation calmly. He responded after an hour saying I could come by the house when he wasn't there to get more of my things. He'd be at work the next day from 9 to 5. He wasn't ready to see me. I asked if he'd leave the evidence somewhere I could photograph it. He said it was all on his phone and laptop. He'd leave his laptop open on the kitchen table with the folder pulled up. His coldness hurt more than his accusations. We'd been partners for 4 years and he wouldn't even talk to me face to face. I drove to our house the next morning and let myself in with my key. The house smelled like Derek's cologne and coffee. I'd been gone 3 days, but it already felt unfamiliar. The wedding magazine I'd left on the coffee table was in the trash. On the kitchen table, I found Derek's laptop open to a folder labeled Evidence. I connected a flash drive and copied everything while taking photos with my phone as backup. There were 37 images, 15 hotel receipts, and a text message thread with over 200 exchanges. The detail made my stomach hurt. Olivia had been so thorough. I forwarded everything to Tom and then walked through the house one more time. In our bedroom, I found my engagement ring exactly where I'd left it on the dresser. But the framed photo of Derek and me from our trip to Maine was gone from its spot on the nightstand. He'd already started erasing me. I grabbed more clothes and some personal items, including my grandmother's jewelry box from my dresser. As I was leaving, I noticed an envelope on the kitchen counter addressed to me. Inside was a formal letter from Derek's lawyer informing me that Derek was initiating legal proceedings to remove my name from the house deed since I'd committed relationship fraud. The letter cited my infidelity as breach of our cohabitation agreement and stated I had 30 days to vacate. I called Tom immediately and read him the letter. He said I needed my own lawyer fast. Real estate law wasn't his specialty, but if Derek could prove relationship fraud, he might be able to force me out despite my financial contribution to the house. I'd put $40,000 into the down payment. Derek had put $60,000. If I lost the house, I'd lose that money plus the renovation costs we'd split. Olivia wasn't just destroying my relationship. She was destroying my financial future too. Rachel gave me the name of her cousin's divorce lawyer even though Derek and I weren't married. The lawyer, Patricia Collins, said cohabitation disputes could be even messier than divorces because there were fewer legal protections. She asked about my proof of financial contribution. I had bank statements showing my down payment and receipts for renovation materials we'd bought jointly. Patricia said that would help, but Derek's fraud claim complicated things. If he could convince a judge I'd been unfaithful and deceptive, the judge might rule I'd violated the good faith clause in our cohabitation agreement. I asked how Derek would prove something that never happened. Patricia said if he had compelling evidence and I couldn't prove it was fake, the burden of proof might shift to me. I needed Tom to work fast. I paid Patricia a retainer that cleaned out most of my remaining savings and left her office feeling desperate. My life was collapsing, and Olivia was getting away with it. That evening, Tom called with preliminary findings. The text messages had been sent from a burner app that spoofed my phone number. He'd traced the app downloads to an IP address that belonged to a coffee shop near Olivia's apartment. The hotel receipts were harder to track, but he'd contacted 2 of the hotels and discovered the reservations had been made online using a VPN. The photos worried him most. They weren't simple photoshops. Someone had used AI to map my face onto another person's body with impressive accuracy. Tom said this level of sophistication meant Olivia either had technical skills I didn't know about, or she'd hired professionals. He asked if she had access to significant money recently. I remembered she'd been spending more, but assumed she'd gotten a raise or was using credit cards recklessly. Tom suggested I look into her financial records if possible. I said I didn't have access to her bank accounts. He said to think creatively about what information I might be able to obtain legally. That evening, I called my mother and asked if she'd noticed Olivia spending money unusually. My mother's voice was cold when she answered. She asked why I was harassing her about Olivia when I should be focusing on fixing my own mistakes. I told her I hadn't made any mistakes, that Olivia had fabricated everything and I was gathering proof. My mother said I was delusional and needed to accept responsibility for my actions. She hung up before I could respond. I sat staring at my phone, feeling completely alone. My family had chosen Olivia's lies over me without even considering I might be telling the truth. Rachel found me crying on her couch and made me tea while I explained what my mother had said. She suggested I stop trying to convince my family and focus on proving my innocence to Derek and the legal system. Tom called 3 days later with more information. He'd found social media posts from Olivia over the past 6 months that showed her with a new friend group, including a guy named Ian Carlisle, who worked in tech security. He specialized in cybersecurity and digital forensics, which meant he'd have exactly the skills needed to create fake evidence. Tom had found Instagram photos of Olivia and Ian at bars and restaurants starting 7 months ago. Their friendship began right around the time the fake evidence started appearing. Tom thought Ian might have helped Olivia or might even be the mysterious Marcus from the fake text messages. I asked how we could prove their involvement. Tom said he'd try to get more information on Ian, but warned that getting concrete evidence might be difficult without crossing legal lines. I asked what that meant. He explained that hacking into Olivia's accounts or devices would be illegal, and anything he found that way couldn't be used in court. We needed to build a case using only legal methods. I felt frustrated by the limitations but understood. Tom said he'd continue investigating Ian and would update me in a week. Meanwhile, I should keep detailed records of everything and avoid direct contact with Olivia. Living at Rachel's apartment felt surreal. I worked from my laptop doing freelance graphic design since I'd quit my office job when Derek and I bought the house together. Another decision that now seemed catastrophic. I'd given up job security to work flexibly from our new home office. Now I had no steady income and dwindling savings. Rachel refused to accept rent money, but I insisted on paying for groceries and utilities. She worked long hours as a nurse, so I cleaned the apartment and cooked dinner most nights to contribute something. At night, I lay awake on her couch reviewing everything that had happened and trying to understand Olivia's motivation. We'd been close as children. She was 3 years older and had always looked out for me. In high school, she'd defended me from bullies. In college, she'd helped me study. When had that changed? I remembered her broken engagement 5 years ago. Her fiancé had cheated on her with her coworker. She'd been devastated. She'd said she'd never trust anyone again. I'd tried to support her, but she'd pushed me away. Maybe she'd been festering this resentment for years, watching me build a happy relationship while hers had ended in betrayal. 2 weeks after I'd left, Derek texted asking if we could meet to discuss the house situation. He suggested a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. I agreed and told Tom about the meeting. He said to record the conversation on my phone if legal in my state. I checked and found single-party consent recording was allowed. I arrived at the coffee shop early and set up my phone to record in my purse. Derek walked in looking exhausted. He'd lost weight and had dark circles under his eyes. He sat across from me without ordering anything. He said his lawyer had advised him to limit contact, but he wanted to try to settle the house situation without a lengthy legal battle. I asked if he'd considered that maybe I was telling the truth about Olivia fabricating evidence. He said he'd thought about little else for 2 weeks, but the evidence was too detailed, too consistent. If I'd been framed, it would require an elaborate conspiracy, and he couldn't understand why Olivia would do that. I asked if he knew she'd been spending time with someone named Ian Carlisle, who had expertise in creating exactly the kind of fake evidence I'd been accused of. Derek's expression shifted slightly. He said Olivia had mentioned Ian as a friend but claimed they were just casual acquaintances. I pushed further, asking if Derek found it suspicious that Olivia had been bringing him evidence for 6 months, but only revealed everything at once in front of my family. Why not tell him immediately when she supposedly discovered the affair? Derek said she'd explain that. She'd been hoping I'd end it on my own and hadn't wanted to hurt him unnecessarily. I asked why she'd involve my parents at all. He admitted that had seemed strange, but Olivia said she'd needed emotional support. I could see doubt creeping into Derek's eyes. I pressed my advantage, asking him to consider what Olivia had to gain from destroying our relationship. He said she had nothing to gain. I reminded him about her broken engagement, her job troubles, her financial struggles. He said those were separate issues. I asked him to explain the timing then. Why would I suddenly start an affair right after we'd bought a house together and set a wedding date? Why risk everything when we were happier than ever? Derek looked down at his coffee. He said people do irrational things, but his voice lacked conviction. I told him I'd hired a private investigator who was finding evidence that the text messages, receipts, and photos were all fabricated. I asked him to give me 30 days to prove it before moving forward with the legal proceedings. Derek said his lawyer had advised against any delays. I asked Derek to trust his gut feeling about me. He'd known me for 4 years. Had I ever lied to him about anything significant? Had I ever given him reason to doubt my loyalty? He admitted I hadn't, but said the evidence was overwhelming. I asked him one more time to consider who had presented the evidence and what their motives might be. He said he'd think about it, but couldn't make any promises. As I stood to leave, I mentioned that I'd recorded our conversation. His eyes widened, and he asked why. I said because I was documenting everything for my defense. He looked hurt and said he'd hoped we could at least be civil. I told him being civil didn't mean being naive. He'd believed lies about me and was trying to take my house. Civil had left the building. I walked out feeling both empowered and heartbroken. I'd stood up for myself but lost the man I'd planned to marry. That evening, Tom called with significant news. He'd managed to get phone records through a contact at a telecom company showing regular calls between Olivia and Ian starting 8 months ago. The calls increased in frequency and duration right around the time the first pieces of fake evidence appeared. He'd also found deleted Instagram posts from Ian's account showing him and Olivia together at his apartment. One photo caption from 7 months ago said, "Working on a special project with this one." Tom said the circumstantial evidence was building, but we still needed something concrete connecting Ian to the creation of the fake evidence. He suggested I try to meet with Olivia directly and get her talking, possibly trick her into admitting something while wearing a wire. I said there was no way she'd meet with me now. Tom said to think about what might motivate her. What did she want most? I realized she wanted to believe she'd won. She wanted to see me broken. If I approached her acting defeated and begging for mercy, she might gloat. Pride made people careless. I texted Olivia from a new number since she'd probably blocked my real one. I said I was sorry for accusing her and wanted to talk privately about moving forward. She responded within minutes asking what I wanted. I said I was ready to sign over my share of the house to Derek and leave town, but wanted to say goodbye to her first. She suggested meeting at a park near her apartment the next afternoon. I told Tom, who immediately ordered a small recording device that looked like a button. The next day, Rachel helped me get dressed and attached the device to my shirt. She squeezed my hand and told me to be careful. I arrived at the park and found Olivia sitting on a bench near the playground. She looked confident and relaxed. I sat beside her trying to appear defeated. I said I'd been thinking about everything and maybe I had blocked out the affair due to stress. Maybe she'd been right to tell Derek. Olivia's eyes lit up with satisfaction. She said she was glad I was finally accepting reality. She'd been so worried about me these past weeks. I asked how she'd discovered the affair initially. She said she'd seen texts on my phone when I'd left it unattended at a family dinner. I reminded her I never left my phone unattended. She stumbled slightly and said I must have been distracted. I asked what the first text had said. She described a message that perfectly matched the fake evidence. Too perfect. I asked how she'd managed to screenshot messages from my phone without me knowing. She said she'd been quick. I pushed further, asking about the hotel receipts. How had she obtained those from my email? Olivia's expression shifted. She said I must have forwarded them to her accidentally. I asked about the photos. She said they'd been posted on social media by the man I was seeing. I asked which social media platform. She said Instagram. I mentioned that I could check my tagged photos. She said he'd probably deleted them. I could see her getting defensive, so I changed tactics. I said I just wanted to understand the timeline because I genuinely couldn't remember any of it. My therapist had suggested I might have dissociative episodes from work stress. Olivia relaxed again. She said that made sense, actually. I probably had been compartmentalizing the affair to protect myself from guilt. I asked when Ian had helped her compile all the evidence. Olivia froze. Her face went pale. I continued saying I knew she'd been working with Ian and I didn't blame her. She'd been trying to protect Derek. Ian must have helped her organize everything. Olivia's mouth opened and closed. She asked how I knew about Ian. I said Derek had mentioned him. Olivia stood up abruptly and said she had to go. I grabbed her wrist gently and said I wasn't angry. I understood she'd been looking out for Derek. I asked if Ian had charged her a lot of money for his help creating the fake evidence. The words hung in the air. Olivia jerked her arm away and told me I was delusional. She said Ian hadn't created anything fake. The evidence was real. Then she walked away fast, almost running. I sat on the bench watching her leave and feeling the small recording device under my shirt. She hadn't admitted to fabricating evidence directly, but she'd confirmed she knew Ian had been involved somehow. I met Tom at his office and played the recording. He listened carefully and then played it again, making notes. He said her reaction to Ian's name was telling, and her defensive language suggested guilt, but it wasn't a clear confession. We needed more. He'd been researching Ian and found he had a girlfriend named Stella who worked at the same tech company. Tom suggested we approach Stella and see if she knew anything about Ian's relationship with Olivia. I asked how we'd get her to talk. Tom said people in relationships usually notice when their partners are spending suspicious amounts of time with other people. If Ian and Olivia had been working closely for months, Stella might have questions. I found Stella's Instagram and sent her a direct message saying I had information about Ian and Olivia that she needed to know. She responded 2 hours later asking what I meant. I said we should meet in person. She agreed to meet at a cafe near her office the next day. When I arrived, Stella was already there, looking anxious. She was younger than I expected, maybe 25, with nervous energy. I sat down and thanked her for meeting me. She asked what this was about. I explained that Ian had helped my sister fabricate evidence to destroy my relationship, and I needed proof. Stella's face changed as I talked. She said Ian had been acting strange for months, staying up late on his laptop and being secretive about his phone. She'd asked if he was cheating, and he'd said he was working on a freelance project but couldn't discuss it due to a non-disclosure agreement. She'd noticed charges on their joint credit card for software she didn't recognize. I asked if she'd confronted him. She said she'd tried, but he'd gotten defensive and accused her of being controlling. She'd let it drop because she didn't want to seem paranoid. I showed her photos of Ian and Olivia together from social media. Stella went quiet. She said Ian had told her Olivia was just a friend who needed tech advice occasionally, but these photos showed them together frequently over many months. I asked if Stella would be willing to look at Ian's laptop or phone to find evidence of what he'd been working on. She said that felt like a violation of trust. I understood but pointed out that Ian had already violated her trust by lying about the extent of his relationship with Olivia. Stella said she'd think about it. I gave her my new number and asked her to contact me if she found anything. She left looking shaken. 3 days later, Stella called me at midnight. Her voice was shaking. She said she'd checked Ian's laptop while he was asleep and found a hidden folder with my name on it. Inside were all the fake text messages, the hotel receipt templates, the original photos before my face was mapped onto them, and detailed notes about the timeline Olivia wanted the evidence to follow. There were also invoices showing Olivia had paid Ian $12,000 over 6 months for his work. Stella said she'd copied everything to a flash drive before Ian woke up. She wanted to meet immediately. I told her I'd come to her. Rachel drove me to Stella's apartment building where she met us in the parking lot wearing pajamas and holding a flash drive. Her eyes were red from crying. She said she'd confronted Ian after copying the files and he'd admitted everything. He'd thought it was just helping a friend expose her sister's affair. Olivia had told him I was cheating on Derek and she needed proof to protect him. Ian had believed her until Stella showed him the folder with all the fabricated materials. Then he'd realized Olivia had played him. Stella said Ian was inside the apartment packing. She'd broken up with him and wanted him gone. I hugged Stella and thanked her. She said she was sorry for what Olivia had put me through. Rachel drove us directly to Tom's office even though it was 1 in the morning. Tom lived above his office and came downstairs in his robe when I called. He plugged the flash drive into his computer and spent an hour reviewing the files. When he looked up, his expression was grim satisfaction. He said this was exactly what we needed. The evidence showed clear premeditation and fraud. He'd prepare a detailed report for my lawyer and for Derek. He said I should also consider filing a police report for identity theft and fraud. I called Patricia Collins, who told me to come to her office first thing in the morning. I barely slept that night. The next day, Patricia reviewed the evidence and said we had a strong case not just for defending against Derek's lawsuit, but for going after Olivia criminally and civilly. She recommended I file a police report immediately. We went to the police station together. The detective who took my report was skeptical at first, but became more engaged as I explained the situation and showed him the flash drive contents. He said this was sophisticated fraud and would require investigation. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. The police investigation moved faster than I expected. 2 detectives visited Ian, who confirmed everything Stella had said. He provided additional emails and texts from Olivia, detailing exactly what fake evidence she wanted created. Ian claimed he genuinely believed he was helping expose a cheater, and hadn't realized he was participating in fraud. The detectives were unimpressed by his excuse. They contacted the hotels and credit card companies with the fraud evidence. They interviewed Derek, who finally began to see how thoroughly he'd been manipulated. The detectives called me a week after my initial report and said they had enough evidence to arrest Olivia on multiple fraud charges, including identity theft, falsifying documents, and criminal harassment. They asked if I wanted to be present when they arrested her. I said yes. 2 officers went to Olivia's apartment while I waited in an unmarked car with a detective. They knocked, and after a long pause, Olivia opened the door. The officers explained they had a warrant for her arrest. Olivia's face went through several emotions: shock, fear, anger, before settling on indignation. She said there must be some mistake. They read her rights and put her in handcuffs. As they led her past the car I was sitting in, our eyes met through the window. Her expression turned venomous. She screamed that I'd ruined everything. The detective noted her outburst. Derek called me that evening. His voice was rough. He said he'd spent the day with the police explaining how Olivia had manipulated him for months. He'd reviewed the real evidence against the fake evidence and felt sick realizing how easily he'd been deceived. He said he was sorry for not believing me, for not even considering I might be telling the truth. He'd been so convinced by Olivia's performance and the detailed evidence that he'd ignored his instincts about me. I asked why he was calling. He said he wanted to fix things between us. I told him there was nothing to fix. He'd abandoned me when I needed him most. He'd believed the worst of me without question. He'd tried to take my house and leave me with nothing. Sorry didn't erase that. Derek said he'd been manipulated too, that Olivia had used his trust against him. I agreed she'd manipulated him, but said that didn't excuse how quickly he'd turned on me. A partner should have at least questioned the evidence, asked for my side, investigated before destroying everything. He said he understood if I couldn't forgive him, but asked if we could at least settle the house situation fairly. I told him to have his lawyer contact Patricia. Then I hung up. My parents called the next day, both of them on speakerphone. My mother was crying. She said she'd been wrong about everything and couldn't believe what Olivia had done. My father said they'd failed me as parents by believing Olivia's lies so easily. They wanted to make it right. I asked why they'd believed her in the first place. Why hadn't they trusted me enough to even question the evidence? My mother said Olivia had been so convincing, so detailed, so seemingly heartbroken about having to reveal the truth. My father said they'd thought they were supporting Derek by standing with him against infidelity. I told them they'd chosen to support a future son-in-law over their own daughter without even a conversation about my side. My mother sobbed and said she was sorry. I told her I needed time, that they'd hurt me deeply by abandoning me so completely. My father asked if I'd come to dinner so we could talk properly. I said maybe eventually, but not now. I hung up feeling emotionally drained. Rachel made me tea and told me I'd handled that well. She said setting boundaries with family was one of the hardest things to do. Olivia was arraigned on the fraud charges and released on bail put up by our parents. The criminal trial was set for 4 months away. Patricia said we should also file a civil lawsuit for damages including emotional distress, legal fees, and my financial losses from the house situation. I agreed. The civil suit would take longer but could potentially recover some of the money I'd spent on lawyers and the private investigator. 2 weeks after Olivia's arrest, Derek's lawyer contacted Patricia with a settlement offer. Derek was withdrawing his fraud claim and proposed we sell the house with proceeds split according to our original investment percentages. I'd get back my $40,000 plus 40% of any appreciation and renovation value. It was fair. Patricia advised me to accept. I did. The house went on the market and sold within a month. After closing costs, I received $52,000. It wasn't enough to replace everything I'd lost, but it was something. I used part of it to pay Rachel back for her support, and the rest went into savings. I also paid Tom and Patricia the remainder of their fees. Derek sent me a final text saying he hoped I could eventually forgive him, and that he'd never forgive himself for how he'd handled everything. I didn't respond. The criminal trial began on a Monday in September. I attended every day sitting in the courtroom watching the prosecution present their case. They had overwhelming evidence. Ian testified about Olivia approaching him with what she'd claimed was a need to gather proof of her sister's affair. The texts and emails between them were explicit about creating fake evidence. The financial records showed Olivia had withdrawn money from a trust fund our grandmother had left her to pay Ian. The defense tried to argue that Olivia had genuinely believed I was cheating and had only been trying to help Derek. But the evidence showed clear fabrication, not investigation. The prosecution showed the original photos before my face had been mapped onto them. They showed the timestamp discrepancies in the fake text messages. They demonstrated how Olivia had accessed my credit card information through a family account she shouldn't have had access to. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They found Olivia guilty on all charges. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later. At sentencing, Olivia's lawyer argued for leniency, saying she'd been struggling with mental health issues related to her broken engagement. The judge was unmoved. She sentenced Olivia to 18 months in prison, followed by probation. She also ordered restitution for my legal fees and damages. Olivia turned to look at me as they led her away. This time, her expression was defeated. The civil trial happened 8 months later. The jury awarded me $85,000 in damages covering my legal fees, therapy costs, and emotional distress. Olivia's lawyers filed an appeal, but it was denied. Patricia said actually collecting the money would take time since Olivia had limited assets. I didn't care much about the money anymore. The victory was in being vindicated. My parents tried repeatedly to rebuild our relationship. I met with them eventually at a restaurant. They cried and apologized and said they'd been terrible parents. I told them I appreciated the apologies, but trust took time to rebuild. We agreed to start with monthly dinners and see how it went. It felt mechanical at first, but slowly became more natural. I never fully trusted them the way I had before, but we found a new equilibrium. Derek tried to reconnect several times. Flowers, letters, requests to meet for coffee. I declined every time. What we'd had was destroyed not just by Olivia's manipulation, but by his willingness to believe the worst of me so easily. Rachel eventually told him to stop contacting me. He did. 2 years after everything fell apart, I was living in a new apartment across town, with a steady job at a design firm, and a small circle of friends who'd proven their loyalty. Rachel and I were still close, closer than ever. I'd started dating again carefully, taking time to build trust before committing to anything serious. I thought about Olivia sometimes, wondering if prison had changed her or if she still blamed me for her consequences. I thought about Derek and hoped he'd learned something about trust and manipulation. Mostly, though, I thought about how I'd survived losing everything and rebuilt a life I was proud of, a life based on genuine relationships and hard-won self-respect. The betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but instead it had shown me who I really was when everything was stripped away. And I was someone who fought back, who demanded truth, who refused to accept lies even when everyone around me insisted they were real. That knowledge was worth more than the relationship I'd lost or the family trust that had been broken. I'd found my own strength by being forced to stand alone. Some nights I still woke up angry about the 6 months Olivia had spent meticulously destroying my life, but then I'd remember she was the one who ended up in prison while I'd ended up free. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.